Yeah. Well, good evening. I'm Joel Hicks. I'm the chair of the Climate Action Committee. I call this June 7th, 2022 meeting to order. Um, I'd like to start out. I move that the Executive Committee uh, approve the May 3rd, 2022 minutes. Is there a second?
Aye.
Seconded by Mr. Shiles. Any questions? Hearing none, call the motion. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The May 3rd, 2022 minutes are approved. Do we have any members from the public on the call? Seeing none in the audience, I will move on to my comments. I will keep them brief. I got a chance last week to um, be on a panel up at Penn State with some other practitioners, mostly academics and folks working um, at DEP. Um, just to update the effort that sort of spearheaded what we're doing here. I think most of you remember we were in the first cohort of the local climate action um, program that was paid for through state energy program funds that DEP received. That program is still moving forward. It was sort of always, I think, looked at as a possibly being able to continue, and based on community response and the fact that we have so many municipalities in the state of Pennsylvania, there continues to be more interest than they can actually accommodate. But they're doing another cohort, um, and they were reaching out to a few folks who had share their experiences, which I did on behalf of our borough, to make the program better moving forward. I think one of the big um, takeaways, lessons learned, is that the the timelines for sort of completing climate action plans were always a little overly ambitious. I think uh, in the initial program, they uh, provided technical support, matching universities to local officials, and the timelines that they were advocating for were basically half, 3 to 4 months on a greenhouse gas inventory, 3 to 4 months for a climate action plan. I think experience has shown that the timelines for the greenhouse gas inventory are actually not too bad, um, assuming that you get, you know, responsive data input. But the timelines for the developing a climate action plan were probably gravely um, miscalculated, and you just had a variety of places that were finding that they needed more time. We certainly did uh, probably an extra 9 months, 9 to 12 months, and I think they've taken those lessons and are working to extend this ultimately to a 2-year program, which I think we all agreed was probably made more sense. The last real takeaway was just an acknowledgement. There were several academics from around the state, and those who work in the policy field, realizing there's a real need for universities and colleges to work with smaller municipalities. There's obviously a resource or institutional capacity gap, very limited resources. So started continuing to talk about how universities and colleges could, best assist local municipalities in Pennsylvania, and talk not just faculty engagement, but student participation, um, where that has worked well, where that hasn't worked so well, and um, ways that we can improve on that. So um, I was encouraged to see that the program's still moving forward, and that they're always improving it. And um, yeah, they, we are getting asked a lot more questions about follow up and how are things going and what's working, what's not, and so it's the way the process should work. So that really was the most significant comment I had. I mean, there's some things I'm looking forward to discussing once I turn it over to the team leads. Um, I will just uh, you know, got the ball rolling in the very recent past of starting sort of the data collection process for getting our local government operations inventory done. Um, I shared the templates of the data types of data we need to collect. I'm confident it won't be a big lift. Look forward to working with Tony and his team and Jared. So again, I mean, most of this information is looking at our consumption and the buildings we own. A lot of it's our public on-road and off-road fleets. Um, a little bit on our water and wastewater management systems. The intent here, so the emissions of this inventory are actually already captured in the community greenhouse gas inventory, but this provides a higher fidelity view of municipal ops. And since it's an activity that the borough can control more directly, it makes sense to continue with that effort. So I don't expect any questions since I just sort of shared that with Jared and Tony, but I don't know if there's anything right off the bat that
August 15th deadline for that?
I'm sorry.
Was it an August 15th deadline for response?
Yes.
Okay.
That's.
I mean, I should know if there's any showstoppers before that time. So,
I think mostly that target is because that's just a reasonable amount of time. I mean, we should be able to do that. So there's always a couple of unique features in every municipality that makes these general templates a little bit need to be tweaked a bit. I'm confident we'll have plenty of time to address that. I mean, but part of what we're going to learn here is to address what David's team is doing with municipal vehicles. It'll give us a very precise kind of view of what we have in inventory, what's a reasonable sort of glide path to turn them over, and then ultimately what's the impact to the vehicle fleet, the public vehicle fleet. So that concludes my comments. Did we get our last minute? Good. It's good. Good to have you here, Carla. I'll just turn it over now to our community engagement team lead, Mitch Shiles. So you got a lot of great things happening. So
thanks, Joel. So I guess most so we've got a few focus groups coming up. We also have a workshop that will be happening tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Professional Education and Empowerment Center. That's at the corner of North Pitt Street and Penn Street. That'll be run by Hans Pfister, who's a a physics professor at Dickinson College, and he's conducting it on phase change materials that can be used for passive heat regulation. We're also going to be hosting, we won't be hosting a focus group, but we'll be attending an Eastside Neighbors meeting tomorrow evening. We'll be talking about insulation and just general climate action objectives. And then we'll also be holding focus groups at PEEC, the Professional Education Empowerment Center, on June 20th, July 11th, August 8th, and August 29th. And I believe Dave's going to come to the June 20th one. We're going to be focusing on transportation for that one. We'll be focusing on energy efficiency and rental housing on the July 11th meeting focus group, and general climate action objectives again on August 8th, and then residential electrification on August 29th. And we'll be providing free pizza at the focus groups. And then people can just RSVP at engagecarlisle@gmail.com, so we know how many people to get pizza for. I think that's all I've got.
Yeah, any questions? Thanks. Thanks to Stephanie for coordinating, get the word out on Engage. And do we have for the ones at the PECC? Do we have the capability of recording those, or at least maybe
I'm planning on recording the focus groups on my phone and then just transcribing them, or having a group member, team member transcribe them. But yeah, I'd like to record them, or at least, but as long as everybody gives me their permission at the. Right. I'll be doing it at the PEC ones. I don't know if people will be comfortable with that at the ones we're attending. Sort of like Eastside Neighbors and
that was sort of the.
We also
would anticipate,
we're meeting with the League of Women Voters too. I think it's the 14th. The date has changed a few times. I have it on my email somewhere, but.
Great. All right. Thanks, Mitch. Tony.
Yeah, I don't have much. What I've been working on really slowly for a while has been putting together some sort of, I guess I would call it a kind of an assessment and monitoring template that we can use as we get some of these implementation plans pulled together. Just a very simple template that we can use to track progress. And the struggle has been, I've tried doing a couple for some of our most well-developed objectives, and even the variation across those objectives has made it hard to have a template that would work for all of them. So it's been in stops and starts a bit to try to kind of pull something together that works. Maybe by our next meeting, I can maybe try to share that with you all beforehand, and we can kind of talk through that a bit, especially as some more targeted kind of implementation plans come together.
Can you just share what platform would that be based on? Or
I'm just an Excel. Just
an
like
Excel.
Just like a simple spreadsheet that you could plug in some numbers with some initial conditions in terms of where we're at, and some targets, and then some actual numbers, and it would kind of calculate progress automatically. Just something that could be kind of used consistently across all of our. And what now I've been thinking about this in the context of now the LGO inventory. It may be because those are more tractable and measurable from the very beginning. We could kind of beta test this kind of assessment spreadsheet there.
Could you remind me of what the LGO?
The local government operations inventory. Yeah. So just the borough, municipal emissions, basically. Yeah.
I look forward to that, and I think that's important. That kind of brings up an issue or something I want us to have us think about, especially in view of the fact that I know David's team is starting to get, break it down in the project level. Each of those projects sort of has its own planning path, but that's probably the level where having a member of your team helping maybe with the assessment and monitoring part of those projects would make sense. I think we're getting close to being mature enough to hopefully identify someone from your team who can either be part of one of those projects or certainly be in close communications. I really want to stress how moving forward, I'm committed to making sure every recommendation that we have for council is well planned and accountable in terms of our ability to monitor and also to be very clear about what we expect to achieve from any particular activity. And so that's going to be, in addition to the macro things that the PAT is doing, we definitely need to feel like we can be creative. If you're developing a template, maybe that works well for 40% of the projects we can replicate.
And it may be the measurable outcomes for some of these things. The first best thing may not be emissions directly, right? So I'm thinking of things like EV charging stations. That could just be counting them and coming up with a timeline of certain targets of installations we want over a period of time. We can always do some work to back out based on when we start getting some usage data of those chargers.
Right.
Kind of what sort of actual electric vehicle usage we're getting in the borough. And we could begin to back out some emissions estimates from those. But
great. Yeah, I think as we build a timeline, we definitely need to identify what I would call sort of detours based on what we're seeing. We may think utilization of chargers at a certain spot was going to be good, but it turns out it wasn't what we thought, and maybe there's an area that is getting more activity than we thought that could have a shift. That's great that you're thinking about that. And obviously we'll probably link to you to kind of populate the LGO data as it comes in over the summer. Great. Carla, hope you're well. Glad you're with us.
Yes.
Over to you.
Thanks for letting me do this remotely today. It's been a little nuts. So as I had communicated with you earlier today, Joel, my team is just now providing reviews of the sort of white paper that you provided, and I'm going to combine all their comments together and get with them and have a discussion about that on the 15th, and then we will set up a meeting to meet with a group of people from PPL, the Sean Pressman and Marianne Miranda and Margaret Shealy, and come up with some sort of plan of attack for some sort of program. One of the things that my group talked about too was rather, trying to identify something that we could do directly for people and not just the property owners for the lower income housing. And if it would be interesting to try to figure out, I don't know if that information would be available, if there's people that, don't make a ton of money but still own their own home, and then maybe that we could do something with them as well.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like that scope is worth looking at too. So it sounds like there's consensus among the group, though the initial sort of outlines of the plan are worth moving forward and getting PPL and others involved. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think so. They had some questions about, I think it's just a matter of clarifying a couple of things about how that would work, but that will come in the discussion. So I'm not concerned.
Great. I look forward to kind of hearing the outlines of what we, what you want to achieve with your first meeting. I think Tony's about. He will probably say what I think early on in this. It would be good to get someone from Tony's team involved, since this is a program that is just. In some respects, it's sort of designed to collect very specific information, and yeah, if you can, as you're getting all the people in their chairs who should be part of this project, definitely reach out to Tony to make sure his team has a presence in how we would potentially run it.
Absolutely, thanks.
Yeah, similar comment. I missed last month when you guys first talked about this multifamily housing program, which is fantastic. I guess one question I had in terms of the data collection here was my understanding of most multifamily units is that all of the energy, all of the electricity use is monitored by unit, right? And they are not at the building level.
It's
by apartment.
It's usually by apartment. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so I guess in terms of data sharing, we're gonna have to talk with PPL about this, right? Because individuals can get access easily to 2 years of daily data going back. But the problem will be if these apartments have changed hands, it will be under new accounts, right? So anyway, we'd have to come up with some sort of agreement with PPL to access the unit level electricity usage going back 5 years. Well, because it may have been through 5 different accounts. I guess is what
I think the way I sort of envision this, I think it's easier than that. I think actually, I think that it's easier for PPL to share multifamily housing data when it's not at the unit level, because there are more privacy concerns. If you say, well, here's the consumption from everybody in the building, you don't have to worry nearly as much about privacy information.
Oh, so you're saying they could aggregate it for us?
They have. Well, I'm anticipating that's the only way they would be willing to do that, and so any potential landlord who wanted to make an improvement would basically say, here's my aggregate usage, here is the 1 or 2 changes I advocate to make, here is what I think the reduction will incur, but it'll be at the aggregate level, and it probably doesn't we can if it's an HVAC system, we can probably pretty much assess that the benefits go to everybody, but if they're recapitalizing energy efficiency products in half of their room, we may not know exactly who that accrues to, but Carla, I know you're sensitive. I mean, we're going to have thresholds for who is eligible. There needs to be, within the units, an adequate number who qualify as low or medium income folks, and I just know from my experience, it's really actually very tough to get unit level information, but we do lose a little bit of fidelity as a result.
Well, that was mainly my concern, is that the individual level stuff, they'd likely have to get permission from from those people.
My hope is, because it's at the building level, this will be much less of a ask for PPL and UGI. So, yeah, good question. Well, I look forward to that, Carla. Anything else you need to share?
Nope, okay. Not now. We have the meeting scheduled for 12:30 on the 15th of June.
Okay, thank you for that update. David, over to you, sir.
The Transportation Task Force met on May 17th to brainstorm, the three members of the task force. And from that brainstorming, I jotted down, I think it's a little too much to call them projects. They're suggested project names. And what I intend to do is to get back together with the members of the task force and go over these potential projects, which Joel has annotated his thoughts to them, and many of them are questions of, are you thinking about this? And get these, there are 7 potential project names for the first objective to advance adoption of electric vehicles, and 3 for the reduce vehicle miles traveled objective. And what I'd like to do is to get a member of the one of the 3 members of the task force to start putting flesh on these ideas, and then to bring them back to the task force. And Tony, that may be where somebody with criteria would start to sit in. The first meeting that we had on May 7th, we met right here in this room for about an hour at 4:30, because Rick Freeman lives a pretty good commute from here, and it's handy for him to just spend an extra hour before he heads home. We may also be able to just go over these by telephone, not even having a video call, but we'll do that soon, within the next couple of weeks, and then start. I'll be able to report more detail at the next meeting. On June 20th, at Mitch's suggestion, he and I got together, and it was timely because I had just sketched these ideas out, and so I sent him the ideas, and with how does this look to you? Do these seem to make sense? And it may be that of the 7 electric vehicle projects, a couple of them turn out to be realistic. When we get to, I've been asking everybody as I've talked about this, about one particular aspect of decreasing vehicle miles traveled, and that is we can encourage e-bikes and non-e-bikes and other forms of non-motorized vehicle travel. Fundamentally, the person using that non-motorized vehicle, that is an e-bike being a non-motorized vehicle, a 2-wheel vehicle instead of a 4-wheel vehicle. That person has to feel safe on the streets. And so that is something that I think is important for us to face in this objective to decrease vehicle miles traveled. There are other ways to do it with jitneys and other ride services, and that may well be something that we um, uh, include in our thinking. But if we want to think about two-wheeled vehicles, whether they're electric motors or human powered, the people that use them are going to have to feel safe, and so a lot of our attention in that objective, I think, is going to have to be on uh, changes to the way the streets are used, the way the streets are controlled, let's say, so that there can be shared use um, along with four-wheel motorized vehicles, because electric cars are going to be almost equally as dangerous to bicyclists as internal combustion vehicles. They might not be quite as large, but they're still going to be a challenge for two-wheel travelers. So, Joel, do you want me to read off the project name ideas, or
If you, it's up to you. If you think your team is ready has decided there's a subset they want to focus on in the near term.
we have not decided?
Okay. In that case, I don't think we
Okay.
need to.
Next meeting, I will have that.
Yeah. Great. I really, I found your breakdown of the objectives and the potential projects really useful. It's, kind of the model I look for all the task forces to use. I did maybe bring up for conversation, thinking through particularly your first, your first project was engage local retail businesses that might be interested in placing EV charging stations. I don't know if you engage multifamily residential. Do you think it would be beneficial, not as its own project, but I can't help but think that it would be useful perhaps for your team to develop what I would call just an overarching EV charging infrastructure strategy or approach. In the purpose of trying to achieve our objective, I think the team could easily break it down into 4 or 5 clear, what are we going to do with, what should the role of public parking lots, everything the municipality owns in that strategy. What's the role of commercial properties in that strategy? What's the role of residential, including, if it's unique, multi-family housing, and then probably those 3 might lend themselves to a very different approach individually, and there may be reason to use one of those as sort of a to kind of prime the pump. Like it's more sort of prone to get a better understanding of how we should move forward. I think we all realize there's going to be a business interests as part of the regular profit making of every, there's gonna be a window when we can expect and should expect businesses to sort of fill in the gaps, right? But with EVs, there's a bit of a chicken and egg
There
situation.
also, it's an interesting that you bring that up, and it makes a lot of good sense to not have them be separate issues. But there's another aspect, another foundational aspect, in my view, that long distance interstate travel is. I'm not sure it's going to thrive. That EVs are not going to thrive, at least not for the near term, because you compare pulling into a Sunoco and spending 5, maybe 10 minutes at the most, filling up, jumping back in your car, and being on your way. The best one can hope for with a full charge of an EV is 20 to 30 minutes. So, and I'm not complaining, I'm just observing. So the task force members and Mitch and I are chatting about this. Think that there's a prospect of pursuing the vehicle charging with 2 points of view. One is to encourage the interstate, I-81, what's it called? The electric corridors, or whatever the U.S. Department of Transportation is calling, right? And encouraging that, helping Sheets and Rudders and 7-Eleven to take advantage of it, but then focusing our local attention on things like the Pomfret Street Garage, multifamily dwelling units, volunteers who have some parking spaces that. How about the parking up at the car show, and that sort of thing, and help them perhaps with a little bit more heavy lifting than Sheets and Rudders and 7-Eleven would need, because they've got crews of architects and logistics people, where perhaps someone who owns a few spaces and is interested, hey, maybe I can, make a little bit of money by turning one of those spaces into a charging station where somebody will go to a local restaurant, but not necessarily be driving from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia or something like that.
I fully agree with that, Dave. I think that's a really, and it's like, Carlisle's a great midway stop for a lunch break on a trip between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. If you're going to take 20 minutes to charge a vehicle, might as well stop in Carlisle or get some lunch, or attend one of the restaurants here. It's kind of something.
But to a much greater extent, we've got. I would think we would have people that. One of the task force members, for instance, suggested, well, what if we had shared vehicles charging in Pomfret Street Garage, and I need to, go to Mechanicsburg to pick up something, so I just get one of those vehicles, drive to Mechanicsburg, come back and plug it back in. Or another idea is a lot of the commuters in Carlisle who go to Harrisburg, or people in Harrisburg who come, or Shippensburg who come to Carlisle, they're doing a commute that is going to only use a relatively small fraction of the charge. So having a place that gives you back up to 100%, while in in a relatively short amount of time. Then we've got to think about things like how do you get that person who's working in the office to go out and move the car away from the charging station and all that sort of thing. But that becomes all a local, smallish charge kind of a situation compared to interstate travel where you're looking for a full charge to go another 200 miles. So that's lots and lots of things that we're thinking about.
I think that that extra differentiation between what I would call a true transient versus someone who lives here and commutes, or who we want to attract to spend enough time here that a level 2 charging would actually do something for them. So it sort of breaks the other delineations into two. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Just in the interest of other types of sustainability goals, I noticed I'm working a little bit with the city of Manassas on their climate action plan. Look through some of their data they collect. They have a really, I think, very useful utilization rate of all of their parking lots by day. And I dropped that in a Teams folder, but it sure seems like that would be, we had a student last year do her own counting of one of our parking lots just to see what's the feasibility of using, are we going to, are we going to limit our ability to offer public parking in this lot throughout the day? And, her answer came back pretty clearly no. We weren't going to limit anybody, but it brought up the discussion, and I think council was sort of like, how hard would it be to just do a utilization study of all of our public lots through a normal work day, through a weekend. There is a real simple example in the Teams folder, but I don't even know, Jared, if you have any idea of what a utilization study would cost. I mean, have you? Is this something you're familiar with, or?
It depends on how you go about doing it.
Yeah.
I've seen some applications where they put little magnets, at a parking space, and you pay like, I don't know, $50-$100 per magnet, and then that sort of picks up all these spots. And then I've also heard that those things get busted out by plow blades, and you sort of lose that cost. There's the alternative of using big data for some of this stuff. Have you guys looked at that, like streetlight data?
Streetlight.
Mm-mm. No. Okay. I can send some stuff around. I mean, Waze is another alternative for some localities. Waze Maps, do you remember that? Maybe some.
So it will be. It will. That would also include lot utilization.
I think the so Waze Maps probably not. That would get you the vehicle type and trips and that kind of thing if they share their data. And I know they've done that with localities. Streetlight data is something totally different. They have there's some case studies where they've used like cell phone data that's available publicly to say where people are parking, how long they're parking, where they're coming and going. You have to pay them, like for a year you give them 10-15 grand or something, and then you'd have a subscription to Streetlight to use that for data analysis.
Where's their sensor located?
No, the whole sensor thing was like, that's one application that I've seen, used other places, and from what I can tell, it's a huge cost, and they usually get damaged. So that's like putting a sensor in a parking stall.
You're not aware of anything that would have a a visual, like a camera of a lot that could track, like, or maybe one or two cameras that automatically can detect utilization. You know,
I'm not, but I know that they have that technology for signalized intersections where they, if you pay enough, you can get a program that analyzes the traffic, the vehicle type. But that's, per intersection.
yeah.
I think streetlight is maybe something to
Yeah.
look into.
Okay. You know,
Are
it's
you aware of
anecdotal.
like a sensor like that? Maybe I just haven't seen it. But
Yeah, I can't say I know where they're employing pretty modest technology to get data like that, and I would be curious if there is a fairly reasonable cost to get a lot utilization rate, either as a service or as a hardware that's easy to operate and doesn't cost a lot. But I mean, anecdotally, always poke my head into lots just to see what's going on a particular day, and we just have underutilized lots that we can divert for other purposes. It's a matter of doing it smartly. It's a matter of divert to green space, divert to maybe charging stations, those sorts of things. It's hard for me to think of going forward and saying here without the utilization data.
I've done others where you employ volunteers or even consultants to go out at peak times.
Yeah, you do it the old-fashioned way. I mean, we had we had good data for a very limited time for one parking lot, and if that's the best way to do it, that's fine. It doesn't have to be technologically sexy or anything, but I do think that's probably a fundamental baseline sort of table or reference we would want, not just as a potential for charging station locations or EV parking benefits without charging. There's many ways you can incentivize EVs without a charging station, but also just to create more green space, that sort of thing. I'd like to learn a little bit more about how we could figure that out across our public lots. So, and I think it would fulfill a lot of your project's needs.
Yeah, I was just poking around with this streetlight data. Looks very cool.
So the state of Maine DOT was actually going to get into it a little bit. There's some ethical challenges sometimes using, cell phone use data to make informed decisions. But I mean, if it's publicly available and this business is sort of carrying the weight of making sure that they gather such data ethically, then I don't know that there's really much to debate. It seems like it's got some pretty solid applications for the types of things that this group's trying to do. But there's a cost, so you'd have to justify it.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like they even have ways of tracking bike and pedestrian traffic.
Just the last thing, just to for your consideration, I would encourage you to reach out to Deputy Mayor Landis. Her and I have very, very high level sort of looked at roads or pathways that would not be for motorized vehicles that don't currently exist, that we would have to use public easements to establish. One idea we just sort of looked at, is it even possible was using the easements along the railroad tracks. Yeah, I think we all know that cuts a really nice line for anybody who wants to get across town quickly. And I do 100% agree with your concern about, or your observation that safety is probably going to be near the top of the list of making people want to consider um, not using a motorized vehicle. I consider that like, oh, I'm going from here to there. I don't really want to, get on my bike for that. I mean, that does go through my head. So, I would, she has some thoughts. I think she would love probably to share it with your team. But I just say that because I've had those conversations with her. And please reach out to Brenda Landis, and she might have some good ideas for your team. So thanks.
Just to reiterate, David, what you had said. So it sounded like your team thinks we should prioritize kind of borough resources and multifamily dwellings in terms of EV infrastructure. That's what is kind of the tenor of the list. Seemed to be that. Is that fair?
Well, yes, but perhaps not, because the commercial operators are, they have the resources to pursue the federal funding,
Right.
for instance.
Right.
Whereas the borough has the resources too, but needs more guidance, let's say.
But I know what you're saying. But like Sheets, if Sheets is going to do it, they're going to do it on their own accord, right? Like there's not much we can do to nudge Sheets to put in EV charging or Rudders or Sunoco or anyone else, right?
Yeah,
They're going to do
I think it's worthwhile to, and I will probably volunteer for that, to kind of call around, and as Joel has suggested, Downtown Carlisle Association, Chamber of Commerce are probably good places to start. Like who's been talking to you about this,
right.
and also Joel had found, I think it's the attorney that has been helping 7-Eleven with their permitting. And so
for the new one by Home Depot out there.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
I believe it's a law firm that pursues liquor licenses,
Right?
Because they're going to sell beer and wine at the 7-Eleven. But anyway, just calling around and talking to people who are willing to talk about it, and then the more difficult part of the program is going to be approaching private owners or private companies that own facilities like apartment buildings and or that own a number of, well, when you think of for instance, Caprice, that owns a fair number of the properties along High Street. I happen to know the guys because I did some work for them, but I will talk to them about, what do you think about putting a couple of charging stations behind in the alley behind High Street, because they own most of those lots, and they may think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Again, very anecdotally, I had a couple of folks just reach out to me. Some of you might have saw that there was some coverage of our climate action plan in the Sentinel, and some of the business owners did reach out and say, hey, we'd love to be, support this. Would love to be considered. We've been thinking about putting charging stations in. Love to discuss it further. So I think it's safe to say we haven't really actively engaged, I think, enough with the business community. And I think working with DCA and the Chamber is needed, and I think you'll find support there. But I think we need to be persistent in working with them, making them including them on our dialogue. As we're thinking about activities, sharing them, with the director of DCA, with maybe a point of contact that the chamber identifies, and I think across the board we can be more deliberative with working with the business community, but I think there is support there. So, thanks, David. Okay, so that wraps up our task force updates. Go ahead, Bench.
Got a few questions. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Joel. I just wasn't sure if you were moving to adjourn or not.
I was not moving to adjourn. Do you want to discuss
finish
something
your
related to?
No.
Okay.
This is separate.
Okay. Any? Since we have one, Jared, anything for the group here?
I do have some questions about some of the things David reported out, but I could hold them for another time, I guess. I mean, just off the top of my head, some of the things that you were suggesting, unintended consequences for encouraging certain things to happen, such as increasing the amount of electric vehicle trips in places where you want to encourage active transportation, to me is something that ought to be looked at. I don't know if that's an electric vehicle plan or if it's an active transportation plan, but it should be considered, particularly for the elements that you were talking about, the unintended consequences. If we're really trying to get people to walk and bike, or if they have mobility issues, if we're trying to encourage those transportation modes, then we should be thoughtful about where we site things, particularly on public land. And the other piece, I think I heard some recognition that there would be a business decision to add EV charging stations. I think that's true. My understanding is gas stations tend to make most of their money in the convenience store. So if they're offering a different choice for their consumers, a gas pump or an EV charging station, then they're more likely to make that additional money in the convenience store. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to really focus too much on those places, because they're probably going to make that business decision anyway. But when you ask those people about their marginal costs, ask them why they're not adding stations and what are the showstoppers, I think those would be interesting things to learn.
Yeah. I expect these projects to be taking steps, discussing and modifying the approach based on what we learn and then what we discuss, and over a period of time, perhaps some installations coming out of them, or perhaps some street regulation or street signage, or coming out of the projects. The projects may sort of take on a fairly lengthy life, and actions coming out of them gradually, actions perhaps coming before the borough council, step by step, to do this, that, and the other thing to implement the projects. I know that's all very vague, but
I think that's the right approach. Yeah, I know you're probably thinking this. I mean, we're focusing a lot on charging stations, but do remember there's a lot of other ways of incentivizing EV usage, with just providing a spot only for certain types of. Sometimes I've seen them with hybrid and EVs only, but there are other tools that we can use that are less costly, but also can be implemented faster, quickly. So, that's all. Do you have another
I just had one more thing. I thought I heard the shared vehicle programs. I think that's an interesting way to double dip, particularly if you incentivize EV vehicles as a shared mobility option. That could be something really interesting to sort of, think about.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bit. I don't know. I'm not aware of one in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure there is a business model somewhere that probably has that in mind.
Well, also, shared four-wheel vehicles is one thing, but shared cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes, is a really interesting possibility. Those things cost $1,500, $2,000, and so they're inexpensive. Again, you've got to feel safe on the roads, but on the other hand, a three-wheel cargo bike takes up space like a four-wheel vehicle, and so you don't have the problem of cars speeding around to get to the stop sign ahead of you. Cars just have to slow down. So, there is probably an app that could be fairly readily taken on by a municipal government to manage the sharing of something like a cargo bike. So anyway, it's the sort of things that we're thinking about.
So just to add on to that, I mean, there are already businesses that share vehicles. I mean, you got Enterprise Rent a Car, and you got all these other businesses. If you were to sort of partner with one of them and encourage electric vehicles, say in a public spot, if the place was right, and if the policymakers thought it was a good choice, that might be another way to go. And then the burden is somewhat off of the town to sort of manage the program.
Jared, this exchange is exactly what I'm talking about. I come in and I say, hey, cargo bikes, maybe the borough can buy a bunch of them and rent them out. And you say, well, there are businesses that do this for a living. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, thanks. Any before we adjourn? Any last comments, Mitch?
I've got a few questions. I guess it would be great if we could post any updates on projects as they go on the borough's website. And I understand that there's still a lot of the things are a little bit not quite congealed yet. So I don't want to sort of put too much pressure on anybody. We don't have any actual data on insulation in terms of buildings in Carlisle. That's correct, right? We don't have any other than maybe some of the survey data from the county, which is a bit biased. Do we have? Is it possible to get time series data from PP&L in terms of electricity usage? Would that be? Because I can extract temperature dependent usage out of that, just to get a sense of where we are in terms of seasonal heating load and seasonal cooling load, and how much approximately we're losing through building envelopes in Carlisle.
PPO has that information. You probably need to bundle it into very detailed. And obviously, we relied on their consumption data for our residential, commercial emissions profile. So they have it, and they will likely provide it. But you need to be very, very specific on what.
Of course, yeah, I can be pretty. I mean, whatever they're as granular, as fine granular data as they're willing to give us. I mean, I understand I don't want to invade anybody's privacy, but if it's the whole borough, if it's just residential, or time series would be at least hourly, if not finer, would be great.
It makes me wonder. I mean, is there? Do you think there'd be value just looking at multifamily housing profiles? And if you think so, it might be a good question to present at the task force meeting.
I mean, it would be great if I could attend that, Carla. But I guess it would be ideal to get it for more than just multifamily housing, to get it for the whole bar, just to get a sense of like how much, what are we losing average through not just multifamily housing, but building envelopes in general, because, it's like most of the houses in Carlisle are pretty old. I assume probably the majority are before any sort of insulation was required in any of the building code here. And so it's all, how well insulated buildings are is entirely really dependent on how much owners have had installed over, the various decades. Like the house that I moved into is 100 years old, but the previous owners had put quite a bit of insulation in the attic. Not enough, but, where are we? I guess that's why the focus group tomorrow is going to be really, I think, useful, because we can kind of talk to people about that. But I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of get a sense of like where are we at with insulation and building envelopes, and how far do we need to go to meet our goals in terms of reducing HVAC energy consumption. Because there's a decay in, adding insulation on top of, like, if you already are at, a lot of people are already at, R35 for their attic, adding a lot of insulation on top of that, you start to get a decay in value of energy savings and cost savings by adding insulation. Not that, you can go pretty far before you start, losing any money on it, but it's just sort of like, we want to make sure we're, trying to.
I would recommend if you want to do some time series and do some real studies with PPL, let's keep it pretty modest, just bounded, and in the sense we're focusing on multifamily housing.
Yeah.
Maybe roll you in and see if that seems like a big pull.
Yeah.
And
we can start.
Plus, we can actually use that to.
I think that would be.
Monitor and report, and then see where it goes. I will say ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, is the preeminent advocacy group for energy efficiency. So I think in terms of educational purposes, that's probably the most reliable source. So if for instance, window replacements are probably the least cost effective. They're beneficial, but on a cost basis, probably the most cost for the least benefit of all the energy efficiency improvements you can do. And it would be, I always go to them as the source to kind of find out where, based on the types of buildings, like whether the most beneficial improvements that you can make. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with how much useful life is left in the existing infrastructure to make those but check out ACEEE and
I know about that. Yeah,
good. Carla, if you're still with it, it sounds like Mitch might want to be rolled into that discussion.
With PPNL, yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So just out of curiosity, that's the 15th of June at 12:30, noon 30.
That's actually just my team group. I want to talk through this draft with them prior to getting together with PPNL. So once we have that discussion, then we'll set up a meeting with the PPNL group.
Awesome. Thank you, Carla.
Yep.
All right. Anything for the good of the order?
Just one brief kind of announcement to put on your radar for the fall, in October actually. Dickinson College this year awarded the IPCC with the Rose Walters Prize in Environmental Activism. So they'll be coming to Dickinson October 24th through the 26th for a symposium over those 3 days. A lot of really good speakers coming to campus. In the weeks prior to that, we'll be doing what we're calling a Let's Talk Climate series on campus to kind of prepare campus community for this onslaught of climate science and policy we'll be seeing while the IPCC is here. I've agreed, not to the point of why I'm bringing it up here, I've agreed to do a session in that lead-up event on pathways to net zero emissions, talking about the role of national and subnational climate action. So if any of you want to join me for that session, I'll be in. I'll be bugging you more later about that.
That's great. If there, speaking of recognition, our borough this week was recognized as the highest level of awarded by the Pennsylvania Sustainable Communities. It's reflective of dozens of factors, sustainability factors that communities are engaged with. It was a very, very long process, but it's a real reflection of the deliberative planning that we've made in Carlisle over the years, and it's a real testament to the work of our staff, because the application for getting that status it requires substantial verification that you've met those requirements, and we've had quite a few of our staff working on that. So great job to staff on that, and our goal is to obviously the climate action plan was a major element of us, getting that status, and let's not let go of the platinum element standard moving forward. So congratulations to everybody who worked on that. And with that, one other, unless there are any objections, the July meeting, Tuesday, which I believe will be the 5th of July, will be held a half hour later than normal. There is a HARB meeting scheduled right now, so unless there's any objection, we will meet at 6:30 on the 5th of July. So I'll send a reminder of that. But
No, that's the 5th.
is that a Tuesday?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I will be out of town.
Okay.
And any chance we can push to the following week? I feel like
No.
it's going to be a bad day for a lot of us.
I
It will
would
be a bad day.
appreciate that too,
It'll be a bad
actually.
week the next week. But if you cannot make it, let me know. And
I think I'll be up in the Poconos.
okay. Does anyone else know offhand they will not be here on the 5th?
I won't be here, but I'm happy to attend via Zoom.
So you would not, or would
I will not be in Carlisle, but I'm happy to
But
attend
you could be
remotely.
okay. You will not physically be here either.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Carla, do you know if you would be able to be here?
Yeah, I should be able to make it in person.
Okay. It sounds like we'll
Yeah,
have
okay.
a quorum as an outset, but okay. This meeting's adjourned.